My name is Sophia Miller. I'm 28 now, living in Seattle and working in digital marketing, but I still carry a memory that never seems to loosen its grip on me. It started with something so small, so ordinary, that most people would laugh if I told them. But to me, it was the moment that taught me I could scream in pain and still be invisible in my own home. I was 13 when it happened. I had just finished a soccer game on a damp, muddy field in Portland. It was late autumn, the sky hung low with gray clouds, and the grass was slick with rain. I remember the sound first, cleats skidding, a sharp twist, and then a hot, stabbing pain shooting up my ankle. I collapsed onto the wet ground, my jersey sticking to my skin, the smell of damp earth and sweat mixing with the metallic tang of panic in my throat. My coach said it was just a sprain, but I knew something wasn't right. My ankle throbbed with every heartbeat, swollen and angry. I limped home that evening, dragging my gear bag behind me. Each step was a lightning bolt of pain, but the harder part was knowing what waited for me at the house. Our suburban Portland home wasn't warm or welcoming. It was a 2-story with peeling white paint and a cramped kitchen that always smelled faintly of bleach and leftover casserole. That house had corners where voices echoed too sharp, where silence could cut deeper than words. Karen, my stepmom, was already in the kitchen when I stumbled in. She was wiping the counters with brisk, efficient movements, her lips pressed thin, her blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into permanent disapproval. She looked at me limping across the linoleum floor, dragging mud from the field. Her eyes narrowed instantly. "What happened to you now?" she snapped, her voice cutting through the hum of the old refrigerator. I opened my mouth, ready to explain, but she didn't wait. "Don't tell me you're hurt again. You're always making excuses. Stop whining, Sophia. It's not broken." Her words hit harder than the injury itself. My ankle was swelling right before our eyes, but she brushed it off like I was inventing it for attention. I wanted to scream, "Can't you see? Can't you just believe me for once?" But all I managed was a small, shaky breath. Dad was there too, though I sometimes wonder if it made any difference. He sat at the dining table, laptop open, glasses slipping down his nose, completely buried in whatever tech project he was obsessing over at the time. I looked at him, desperate for a flicker of concern, a word, anything. He glanced up, saw me leaning against the counter, saw Karen rolling her eyes, and then shrugged, like it wasn't his problem. His silence cut deeper than her cruelty. "Sink's full," Karen said, tossing the rag into the basin. "Since you're home early, you can help. Dishes aren't going to scrub themselves." My ankle screamed with every step as I shuffled toward the sink. I gripped the edge of the counter, the cold tile pressing into my palms, and forced myself to stand. The smell of dish soap and old food rose around me as I plunged my hands into the lukewarm water. Each shift of my weight sent sparks of pain shooting up my leg. My vision blurred, not just from the throbbing in my ankle, but from the tears I refused to let fall in front of them. Inside, a voice whispered, "Am I making this up? Do I really feel what I feel, or am I just weak like they say? Does my pain even matter?" I wanted to believe I mattered, but in that house, under Karen's sharp gaze and Dad's indifference, it felt safer to doubt myself than to risk being mocked again. I remember one moment vividly, the sound of a dish slipping from my soapy hands, clattering against the sink. Karen's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting weakness. "Be careful," she barked. "Or maybe you want to break something else and make it all about you." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Every cell in my body wanted to yell that I wasn't faking, that I wasn't trying to make it about me. But I had learned young that silence was my only shield. And Dad, he didn't even look up. The clatter, the tension, my trembling, it was all background noise to him, something to tune out so he could type another line of code. That shrug of his, that half-second glance, said more than words ever could. "You're on your own, Sophia." That night, I lay in my bed, my ankle propped up on a pillow, throbbing under the dim glow of my bedside lamp. The air smelled faintly of the lavender detergent Karen insisted on using, a scent I could never separate from humiliation. I stared at the ceiling and tried to breathe through the pain. But what lingered wasn't just physical. It was the echo of Karen's voice, the sting of Dad's silence, the way they made me feel like a fraud in my own body. Maybe it was just a sprain. Maybe it wasn't life-threatening, but the memory of being forced to scrub dishes while pain carved through me etched itself into my bones. It became the first lesson in a pattern that would haunt me for years. In my family, my pain was invisible. Even now, years later, when my chest tightens or my head pounds, I sometimes hear her voice again. "Stop whining, Sophia. It's not broken." And I wonder, how many times can a person be dismissed before they start dismissing themselves? How many times can you cry silently before you stop believing your tears are real? That day in the kitchen wasn't just about a sprained ankle. It was about the birth of doubt, planted like a seed in the linoleum cracks of that house, watered with every shrug and every sneer, until it grew into something that followed me long after I left home. I was just a kid, aching for someone to believe me. Instead, I was taught to question my own reality, and that lesson, more than the pain in my ankle, stayed with me. I was 5 when my mother died. Some memories are sharp like glass, but that day is hazy, wrapped in a kind of gray fog that never really lifts. I remember clutching the hem of my tiny black dress, the church heavy with the scent of lilies, and watching her smile vanish behind a cascade of earth. I don't remember the sermon, or the faces of relatives, but I remember her picture resting on the coffin. Her hair was shining in the frame, her eyes warm, frozen forever in a look that told me I mattered. And then she was gone. After she died, everything in my world shifted. My father wasn't the same. He buried himself in work, hiding inside the glowing screens of his startup projects, as if building something new could replace what he'd lost. And then came Karen. She was sharp-edged from the very first day. Her words, her laugh, even the click of her heels against the tile seemed to slice through the air. She was a real estate agent, always dressed like she was walking into an open house, with perfume too strong and a tongue sharper than any knife. Dad said she was what we both needed: structure, stability. But what I got was someone who saw me less as a child who had lost her mother and more as a nuisance who needed to be molded, cut down, reshaped. Karen had a brother, Ted. Uncle Ted, I was told to call him, though the word uncle always tasted sour in my mouth. He was a man who wore fake concern like a tailored suit, leaning over me at dinners with that smile that never reached his eyes. "You know, Sophia, you'd look more put together if those jeans weren't so torn," he'd murmur, voice dipped in syrup. Or, "You're a growing girl. Maybe lay off the mashed potatoes, huh?" He said it as if he cared, as if he was mentoring me, but every word chipped at me, carving away whatever small confidence I tried to build. The dining room was their stage. The heavy oak table sat like an anchor in the middle, polished to a shine, and around it I was always under scrutiny. Karen would sit at the head, fork poised like a weapon, her eyes darting to my plate, my clothes, my posture. Dad usually said little, nodding along or distracted by his buzzing phone. And Ted, of course, always hovering with his advice disguised as barbs. I can still hear it, Karen's voice slicing through the clatter of silverware. "That's enough mashed potatoes, Sophia." Her eyes narrowed, not with care, but with contempt, as if my appetite was a crime she needed to punish. My fork froze halfway to my plate, heat rising in my face, the shame louder than any hunger. And then there was Liam, my half-brother, Karen and Dad's son, 4 years younger than me. He was too little to join the chorus of criticism, and maybe that's why he slipped under Karen's radar most of the time. He didn't say much at those dinners, but when I escaped upstairs with my head pounding, he would sneak into my room with a bottle of Advil hidden in his hoodie pocket. He'd sit on the edge of my bed, legs swinging, and whisper, "Here, don't tell Mom." It was such a small thing. An orange pill bottle passed from his hand to mine, but it felt like salvation. It told me someone noticed, someone believed I hurt. In a house where my pain was invisible, Liam's quiet gestures were a lifeline. Still, the contrast was suffocating. Karen's sharp commands, Ted's jabs dressed as jokes, Dad's silence. It was like being erased in slow motion. And in the middle of it, Liam's kindness was a flicker of light I clung to, even as I wondered how long it could last. Sometimes I would sneak into the hallway drawer, where Dad had shoved all of Mom's things. There was a photo of her, my real mother, Emily, tucked under old manuals and bills. I'd stare at her smile, the same smile from the funeral, and think, Mom would have believed me. She'd never let me feel this small, but the photo stayed hidden, and so did I. Every family dinner, every sarcastic remark, every shrug from Dad, layered over the loss I still hadn't been allowed to mourn. My mother's absence was a wound that never healed because instead of tending it, they treated me as if I was the wound itself, something inconvenient, something to cover up, something to dismiss. And each night, when I curled up in bed listening to Karen's heels clicking down the hallway, I whispered questions into the dark that no one ever answered. Why did Dad choose her? Why couldn't he see me anymore? Did losing Mom mean losing myself too? If I close my eyes now, decades later, I can still hear Karen's voice across that oak table, sharp and certain. I can still feel the weight of Ted's fake concern pressing down on me, and I can still see Liam's small hand slipping me that bottle of Advil like it was a secret code that said, "I see you, even if no one else does." That was my childhood. A fading memory of a mother's smile, swallowed by a house where my worth was measured in silence and criticism. A place where pain was mocked, appetite was shamed, and the only kindness I had came from a boy too young to understand the burden he carried for me. By the time I reached high school, I had already mastered the art of hiding pain. Not the kind you can see, but the kind that gnaws from the inside. Migraines had started to stalk me, white-hot knives pressing into the back of my skull, the world narrowing to pulses of light and darkness. But I learned to curl up on the cold bathroom tile, pressing my forehead to the porcelain edge of the tub, letting the hum of the bathroom fan drown out my shallow breaths. It was easier to suffer alone than risk hearing Karen's sharp laugh if she caught me. I still remember the sound of her voice echoing through the thin crack of the bathroom door when she called upstairs. "Sophia, you don't need to fake sick to skip school. We're not buying it." Her words cut sharper than the migraine itself. I didn't answer. My hands were trembling, clutching the orange bottle Liam had slipped into my palm earlier. He always found a way, sneaking down the hallway with careful steps, slipping the meds to me in the bathroom like we were trading contraband. He'd glance at me with those worried eyes, whispering, "Just take 2. You'll feel better. Don't tell Mom." That quiet loyalty was my only shield, but even that couldn't silence the voice in my head. What if Karen was right? What if I really was faking it? Just weak, just desperate for attention. When the people who are supposed to care for you treat you like a fraud, you start to wonder if maybe they see something in you that you don't. College was my escape. I still remember stepping into my California dorm room for the first time, sunlight spilling through the wide windows, the air filled with the scent of laundry detergent and freedom. It was the first place that felt like mine, and the first place I met Mia. She had curly brown hair, an easy laugh, and a way of looking at me that made me feel seen instead of studied. When I had my first panic attack in front of her, heart racing, chest tight, tears I couldn't swallow back, she didn't roll her eyes or accuse me of faking. She just sat beside me on the narrow dorm bed, pressing a cold water bottle into my hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "Breathe. I believe you." That simple phrase hit harder than any dismissal ever had. I believe you. The words I had been starving for since childhood. Those 4 years in California taught me how different life could be when someone believed you. I could exhale. I could exist without constantly defending my own reality. Slowly, I built myself up, piece by fragile piece, until I felt strong enough to step into the world on my own. But freedom has a way of dragging shadows with it. One evening, alone in my apartment, the glow of the city lights spilling through the window, I was digging through an old laptop I hadn't touched in years. The fan whirred louder than it should, and the screen flickered before settling into a dull glow. Buried in an old email folder, I found a message I didn't remember reading. It was from one of Mom's old friends, sent years after her funeral. The subject line was simple. "There are things you don't know." My stomach clenched as I clicked it open. The words inside were short, almost rushed. "Your mother's illness. There were secrets. Ask your father about the will. Don't let them bury it." My pulse quickened, a buzzing in my ears almost as sharp as those old migraines. A will? Secrets about her illness? My mind flashed back to the heavy drawer in our Portland house, where Dad shoved away her photo, where Karen's shadow seemed to erase every trace of her. Could something have been hidden from me all these years? I stared at the screen, my hand frozen on the trackpad, my heart thudding like it wanted out of my chest. For a moment, hope and fear collided inside me. Maybe there was proof that I hadn't been crazy, that Mom's life and her death held truths no one ever told me. But almost as quickly, I shook my head. No, I was being paranoid. I closed the laptop with a sharp click and pushed it to the side. I couldn't go down that road. Not then. Not yet. Still, the words burned into my mind long after the screen went black. There are things you don't know, and as much as I tried to bury that email, as much as I told myself it was nothing, it left me with a gnawing question I couldn't escape. What if everything Karen dismissed, everything Dad ignored, everything I doubted about myself? What if all of it was rooted in a truth they were desperate to keep hidden? I wanted to forget, to focus on my career, my friends, the life I was carving out away from Portland. But once you've seen a crack in the foundation, it's impossible not to wonder how much of the house above it is real. Even now, when I think back to those nights in my dim Seattle apartment, with the city humming outside and the email glowing in my mind, I realize something. Running away gave me freedom, but it didn't silence the doubt. It only sharpened it. Because sometimes the scariest mystery isn't what's out there waiting for you. It's what's been buried inside your own family all along. The office lights had gone dim hours ago, the last of my coworkers disappearing one by one until it was just me, the hum of the fluorescent bulbs, and the frantic tapping of my keyboard. My marketing reports were scattered across the desk, glowing charts on the screen mocking me with their downward spirals. Every click of the mouse felt heavier than the last. The tech crash had gutted half our client list, and I was fighting tooth and nail to prove I still mattered in a company cutting people loose every week. My phone buzzed across the desk, rattling against a half-empty coffee cup. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Karen. Her name flashing on the screen felt like a cold hand gripping the back of my neck. I hesitated, the urge to let it go to voicemail clawing at me, but I knew she'd just call again. With a sigh, I swiped to answer, my other hand still typing like maybe I could outrun her words. Well, well. Her voice dripped through the speaker, thick with sarcasm. How's my city girl doing? Still chasing those big dreams? Or has reality finally knocked you flat yet? I clenched my jaw, forcing my voice steady. I'm working late, Karen. Can we not do this right now? She laughed, sharp and cutting. Working late, huh? Sounds like desperation. You always were dramatic, Sophia. Playing businesswoman in the big city, how cute. But let's be honest, you'll crawl back home soon, won't you? Her words sliced deeper than she could ever know. I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen, my heart thudding against my ribs, palms damp against the keyboard. I could almost hear the linoleum floor of our old kitchen in Portland, see the glare she gave me when she called my sprained ankle fake. Nothing had changed. One phone call and I was 13 again, scrubbing dishes through pain, wondering if I was just imagining it all. I'm fine, I said through clenched teeth, but even to my own ears it sounded weak. Karen let the silence stretch, her smirk practically audible. Then she sighed dramatically. Suit yourself. Don't say I didn't warn you when it all comes crashing down. The line clicked dead. I dropped the phone onto the desk, my chest tightening. My breath came shallow, too fast, the walls of my glass office closing in. Panic surged up like a tide I couldn't stop. I pressed my hands against the cool desk surface, willing myself to breathe, to slow down, to not let her voice echo in my head. But it was too late. The storm was already there, pounding in my temples, buzzing in my ears. She's right, a whisper inside me said. You're not good enough for this. You never were. The next morning, I walked into a client pitch with a smile plastered on my face, but inside, my body was a battlefield. My heart raced so loud I could barely hear the words coming out of my mouth. The conference room was bright, the city skyline glittering through the glass walls, but my vision tunneled, my fingers gripping the presentation clicker like it was the only thing tethering me to the ground. The client nodded politely, their expressions neutral, and I pushed harder, faster, trying to sound confident while every nerve in my body screamed. By the time the meeting ended, I was soaked in sweat under my blazer, my legs trembling so badly I could barely walk back to my desk. I collapsed into my chair, pressing my forehead into my hands, biting back tears. I couldn't let anyone see. Not my boss, not my coworkers, and certainly not Karen. If she ever found out about the panic attacks, she'd weaponize them the way she always had, turning my pain into proof that I was weak, unstable, unworthy. Nights in my cramped Seattle apartment weren't much better. I'd sit at my desk, the glow of the phone screen casting harsh light across the piles of unopened bills and takeout containers. The silence pressed down heavy, broken only by the occasional buzz of another email, another client pulling out, another account gone. My chest would tighten, my breath shallow, and I'd stare out at the city lights, wondering if they were shining for everyone except me. I tried to drown out Karen's voice, but it always found its way back, sneering in the back of my mind. "You'll crawl back home soon, won't you?" And the cruel part was, maybe she wasn't wrong. Layoffs loomed closer with every passing week, and I could feel the ground crumbling beneath me. No matter how many hours I poured into the job, no matter how many nights I sat hunched over glowing screens, the fear gnawed at me. What if I really wasn't enough? What if she had been right all along? The city that once felt like freedom now pressed in like a cage. My career, my independence, the life I had built brick by shaky brick, it all felt like it was slipping through my fingers. And every time the phone buzzed with Karen's name, I knew exactly what she'd say. She'd laugh. She'd remind me I was never meant to stand on my own. I told myself I'd prove her wrong. I told myself I'd fight harder, longer, louder than I ever had before. But when I looked at the reflection in the darkened office window, all I saw staring back was a girl with shaking hands, trying to hold herself together while the world and her family's voices kept tearing her apart. The conference room was bright, the city skyline glittering through the glass walls, but my vision tunneled, my fingers gripping the presentation clicker like it was the only thing tethering me to the ground. The client nodded politely, their expressions neutral, and I pushed harder, faster, trying to sound confident while every nerve in my body screamed. By the time the meeting ended, I was soaked in sweat under my blazer, my legs trembling so badly I could barely walk back to my desk. I collapsed into my chair, pressing my forehead into my hands, biting back tears. I couldn't let anyone see, not my boss, not my coworkers, and certainly not Karen. If she ever found out about the panic attacks, she'd weaponize them the way she always had, turning my pain into proof that I was weak, unstable, unworthy. Nights in my cramped Seattle apartment weren't much better. I'd sit at my desk, the glow of the phone screen casting harsh light across the piles of unopened bills and takeout containers. The silence pressed down heavy, broken only by the occasional buzz of another email, another client pulling out, another account gone. My chest would tighten, my breaths shallow, and I'd stare out at the city lights, wondering if they were shining for everyone except me. I tried to drown out Karen's voice, but it always found its way back, sneering in the back of my mind. "You'll crawl back home soon, won't you?" And the cruel part was, maybe she wasn't wrong. Layoffs loomed closer with every passing week, and I could feel the ground crumbling beneath me. No matter how many hours I poured into the job, no matter how many nights I sat hunched over glowing screens, the fear gnawed at me. What if I really wasn't enough? What if she had been right all along? The city that once felt like freedom now pressed in like a cage. My career, my independence, the life I had built brick by shaky brick. It all felt like it was slipping through my fingers. And every time the phone buzzed with Karen's name, I knew exactly what she'd say. She'd laugh. She'd remind me I was never meant to stand on my own. I told myself I'd prove her wrong. I told myself I'd fight harder, longer, louder than I ever had before. But when I looked at the reflection in the darkened office window, all I saw staring back was a girl with shaking hands, trying to hold herself together while the world and her family's voices kept tearing her apart. The rain followed me all the way down I-5, a steady rhythm against the windshield that felt like a countdown. Each mile brought me closer to Portland, to the house I had sworn never to call home again. By the time I pulled into my dad's driveway, the gray sky had deepened into dusk, and the wet pavement gleamed like black glass. I sat in the car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, watching the faint glow of the porch light flicker through the drizzle. My chest tightened. Dragging my last suitcase through the side entrance and down the narrow staircase, I stepped into the basement suite. The air hit me first, damp, stale, thick with the scent of mildew that no amount of Febreze could mask. The floor was covered in thin carpet, worn and patchy in spots, and boxes of forgotten things lined the walls. Old Christmas decorations, stacks of outdated software manuals, bins marked Ted's Tools. The mattress against the far wall sagged in the middle, sheets folded neatly on top like a hotel trying too hard. A single bulb swayed slightly from the ceiling, casting yellow shadows that made the space look more like storage than shelter. I dropped onto the bed, springs groaning under me, and ran my hand across the cool fabric. It wasn't home. It was a cage with softer edges, and I hated myself for being here. Seattle had drained me dry, first the job, then the savings, and finally my pride. Rent had chewed through what little cushion I had, and when the layoffs swept through my office, I didn't stand a chance. For weeks I told myself I'd figure something out, but when the numbers in my bank account dropped to 2 digits, survival left me no choice. The door creaked, and I looked up to see Liam peeking inside. His face broke into a tentative smile, boyish despite the years. "You're really here," he said softly, almost like he couldn't believe it. "Yeah," I answered, forcing a small smile. "Lucky you." He stepped in, holding out 2 cans of soda, condensation dripping down the sides. He tossed one to me, and I caught it clumsily. "It won't be so bad," he said, settling onto the edge of a box. "I'll make sure of it." Something about the way he said it, earnest, hopeful, made me want to believe him. His warmth was a flicker of light in this damp cave, but no amount of kindness could erase the truth. This house wasn't safe for me. The next morning, I padded upstairs, the basement stairs creaking under my weight, and found Karen already waiting in the kitchen. Her blouse was crisp, her lipstick perfectly applied, not a hair out of place. She looked like she was about to close a deal, not confront me. She carried a single sheet of paper, and her smile was polished to a shine, as artificial as the lemon-scented cleaner that filled the air. "Look, Sophia," she said, laying the flyer on the counter like a gift. "A job opening. Thought you might want to check it out." I glanced down. Telemarketing, minimum wage, nowhere near the field I'd spent years building. My chest constricted, a bitter laugh rising in my throat. This wasn't help. It was sabotage disguised as kindness. "Thanks," I murmured, folding the paper once and tucking it into my bag. My fingers pressed into the flyer harder than I meant to, the edges digging into my palm. Karen's smile tightened, and then her voice shifted, sharp and commanding. "You'll be hosting Thanksgiving this year. We've got a full house coming, so don't screw it up." The words froze me in place. My mind flicked back to another kitchen, another command, her voice snapping, "Stop whining, Sophia, it's not broken." Back then it was my sprained ankle. Now it was an entire holiday. Nothing had changed. I met her eyes, searching for even a trace of softness, but her gaze was as cold and flat as the stainless steel appliances gleaming behind her. It wasn't a request, it was an order. Later, standing in that same kitchen, I tried to imagine how I would pull off a Thanksgiving feast. The counters were spotless, reflecting the glow of the overhead lights, and the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. I scribbled a grocery list, tapping the pen against the counter, when something caught my attention. A faint red light. At first I thought it was a reflection, but then it blinked. My stomach lurched. In the corner, high above the cabinets, a small camera was tucked against the wall. Sleek, black, nearly invisible, except for that steady red pulse. I froze, my skin prickling as if 1,000 eyes had turned on me. My reflection stared back at me from the fridge, wide-eyed, pale, chest rising and falling too fast. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, loud and insistent. Why was there a camera in the kitchen? I forced myself to breathe, telling myself it had to be security. Maybe Dad had gotten paranoid. Maybe it was nothing, but deep down, unease coiled like smoke in my chest. The email, that message I'd found on my old laptop back in Seattle. Your mother's illness. There were secrets. Ask your father about the will. My throat tightened. Was this camera connected somehow? Was someone watching me, recording me, the same way they'd erased pieces of Mom's life? Who's watching me? I whispered under my breath, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles whitened. It's not about Mom, is it? The sound of the front door opening snapped me out of my spiral. Liam appeared with grocery bags cradled in his arms, cheeks flushed from the cold outside. Hey, he said, setting the bags down. You okay? You look off? I blinked rapidly, forcing a smile. Yeah, just tired. He studied me for a second longer but didn't press. I grabbed a bag from him, letting the rustle of paper and the smell of raw turkey mask my nerves. As the day wore on, I buried myself in the clatter of pans and the sharp scent of onions frying in oil. I shoved the thought of the camera down, deep, where it couldn't claw at me. I told myself to focus on survival, one task at a time. Grocery lists, recipes, timing. If I stayed busy enough, maybe I could ignore that blinking light. But every time I stepped back into that kitchen, I felt it. The weight of unseen eyes, the prickling awareness of being watched. And no matter how hard I tried to dismiss it, the thought returned, louder, more insistent each time I caught that tiny red pulse. It's not just about Thanksgiving. It's not just about survival. Someone is watching. And somehow I know it all leads back to Mom. By the time Thanksgiving prep truly began, I was running on fumes. The kitchen counters were buried under bags of flour, tins of pumpkin puree, stacks of pie crusts, and the largest turkey I'd ever seen thawing in its plastic wrap. The air was thick with competing scents, onions frying in butter, cinnamon dusting the air from a pie I had just slid into the oven, and the faint chemical tang of cleaner still lingering from Karen's obsessive scrubbing. The hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic tick of the clock on the wall seemed louder than usual, pressing into my temples until even the quiet felt unbearable. I gripped the cutting board, knife in hand, trying to steady myself as I chopped carrots into uneven slices. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Sweat prickled at the back of my neck even though the kitchen wasn't particularly warm. Each downward motion of the knife felt heavier, like I was dragging stone instead of steel. Halfway through the pile, the blade slipped, nicking my fingertip. A bright sting shot up my hand. I hissed under my breath, dropping the knife, and stared at the tiny bead of blood forming. But the cut wasn't what scared me. It was the way my head swam, a sudden wave of dizziness that left me gripping the counter to stay upright. I closed my eyes, swallowing hard. It was just stress, I told myself. Just the pressure of returning here, of having Karen breathing down my neck, of being reminded of every failure that dragged me back into this house. The phone on the counter buzzed, screen lighting up with Mia's name. Relief washed over me as I answered, pressing the cool glass against my cheek. Hey, you sound winded. Mia's voice came through, soft but urgent. What's going on? I'm fine, I said quickly, forcing my voice steady. Just prepping dinner. You know, Thanksgiving chaos? She wasn't buying it. Sophia, you sound exhausted. You've barely slept since you got back there. Please sit down, rest for a while. I sank onto a stool, pressing my palm against my forehead. The pulse of my headache throbbed in time with the ticking clock, every beat a drum inside my skull. I can't. Karen's got me hosting the whole thing. If I stop now, I'll never catch up. There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. You don't have to prove yourself to her. You don't. Promise me you'll take care of yourself. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to let the knife clatter back onto the counter and crawl into bed. But Karen's voice was louder in my head, the sneer of her words already forming. The kitchen door creaked, and suddenly she was there, heels clicking across the tile. She gave me one look, sweat on my brow, hands trembling, my shoulders slumped, and smirked. "What now?" she asked sharply. "Don't tell me you're worn out already." "I'm fine," I muttered, echoing the same lie I'd just told Mia. Karen tilted her head, eyes narrowing with that infuriating glint, like she knew something I didn't. "Suck it up, Sophia. We've got a full house tomorrow, no excuses." Her tone was casual, dismissive, but her eyes lingered too long, too sharp, as if cataloging every falter in my body. My stomach knotted. For one fleeting second, it wasn't her words that cut me. It was her look. That flicker of recognition in her eyes, like she had seen these exact symptoms before. She turned on her heel and disappeared into her office, leaving me frozen by the counter, knife still lying where I'd dropped it. My heart hammered in my chest. She's seen these symptoms before. Why is she lying? I wanted to shake the thought away, but it burrowed deeper with every pulse in my skull, every tremor in my hand. I slid my phone back into my pocket, screen still faintly glowing with Mia's missed words. For a moment, I considered calling her back, confessing what I'd just seen in Karen's eyes. But the sound of footsteps outside the kitchen made me stop. Liam. He lingered by the hallway, half hidden in the shadows, his face pale. His gaze wasn't on me, it was fixed on the door Karen had just disappeared through. I opened my mouth to speak, but he raised a hand, shaking his head. He had heard something. I caught only fragments, Karen's muffled voice seeping from her office, but Liam's expression said it all. His lips parted, disbelief flashing across his face, before he ducked back toward the stairs. My chest tightened. She hadn't just been dismissing me. She had said something about Mom, about her health. I stood there, surrounded by the clutter of half-prepped dishes, the turkey still thawing, pies cooling on the counter, and felt the air shift. The kitchen that had been suffocating with chores now felt dangerous. The blinking camera light in the corner loomed in my mind again, and the weight of invisible eyes returned. I pressed my palm harder against my temple, whispering to myself, "It's just stress, just stress." But the lie felt thinner this time, more fragile, because deep down I knew Karen wasn't just dismissing me. She was hiding something, something big, something tied to Mom, and for the first time I realized I wasn't imagining it. The betrayal I felt wasn't paranoia, it was real. Thanksgiving was supposed to feel warm, but to me the dining room air was heavy, pressing against my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. The table looked like a magazine spread. Golden turkey at the center, candles flickering soft light across polished silverware, plates stacked with sides that filled the room with cinnamon, sage, and butter. Relatives filled the chairs, their laughter bouncing off the walls. I tried to match their cheer with a smile, carrying in a tray of rolls, but every step made my lungs ache. The pain had been building all day. I told myself it was just stress, the strain of hosting, the exhaustion from days of prep. But as I stood by the table, placing the basket down, a sharp pressure clamped behind my ribs. It spread outward, tight and crushing, like an iron grip around my chest. I gasped, clutching the edge of the table, willing my knees to hold. Karen's eyes caught me immediately. She sat at the head of the table, red wine swirling in her glass, her lips curved in something between a smirk and a sneer. "Oh, don't start again, Sophia," she said, voice loud enough to silence the chatter. "You're not sick. You just don't want to help clean up afterward." Her words stung sharper than the pain, humiliating me in front of everyone. My breath came shallow, ragged, but before I could defend myself, Dad sighed. He didn't even look directly at me, just shook his head as though I were an inconvenience. "Karen's right. Always something with her." The words rang in my ears. I gripped the table harder, vision tunneling. I wanted to scream, to beg them to see me, but all that came was a hoarse whisper inside my own mind. "I'm dying, and they think it's a show." The room tilted. My hips slammed against the sideboard, plates rattling before one slipped and shattered on the linoleum with a sharp crack. Gasps rippled around the table. I stumbled backward, clutching my chest, and the chandelier lights fractured into streaks above me. My body gave out. "Call 911!" Liam's voice ripped through the silence, raw and panicked. He shoved his chair back so hard it scraped the floor, rushing to catch me as my legs buckled. Karen shot up too, but instead of panic, her eyes flashed with anger. "She's fine," she hissed, voice low but cutting. "She's putting on a show, Liam. Don't you dare." "She's not faking," Liam yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. His hands were steady as he lowered me to the floor, broken plate shards crunching under my weight. He pulled out his phone with shaking fingers, dialing fast. "She can't breathe. She's collapsing. Send someone now." His voice tumbled over itself, frantic and pleading. The room dissolved into chaos. Relatives muttered, some insisting it might be anxiety, others frozen in shock. Karen stood above us, jaw tight, eyes narrowed, refusing to see what was happening right in front of her. Dad rubbed his forehead, muttering under his breath like I was still a nuisance, even as I lay gasping at his feet. The cold of the linoleum seeped into my back, each shallow breath a losing battle. I stared up at the chandelier, its crystals blurring into jagged halos. The sound of voices warped and echoed like I was slipping underwater. The only thing anchoring me was Liam's hand gripping mine, warm, firm, refusing to let go. Sirens pierced the night before long, red and blue lights flashing through the front windows, splashing across the turkey, the pies, the perfect white tablecloth. The paramedics stormed in, their voices clipped and urgent. "Arrhythmia, unstable rhythm. Get her on the gurney now." I felt pads pressed onto my chest, wires tugging against my skin, the rush of cold oxygen against my lips. My body didn't feel like mine anymore. I was a malfunctioning machine, alarms sounding, hands moving me from one place to another. As they wheeled me through the doorway, I caught Karen's face one last time. She stood stiffly in the corner, arms crossed, lips pressed into a line. No tears, no fear. Just that glare, sharp as ever, like I had ruined her evening. And then Liam's voice cut through, cracking like thunder. "She had the same symptoms Mom did, didn't she?" His words weren't just accusation, they were betrayal laid bare. The room fell silent. Karen's face didn't move, but her silence was louder than any denial. I wanted to lift my head, to demand answers, but the strength wasn't there. The gurney rolled past the glowing candles and untouched plates, out into the freezing night air where the ambulance waited. Inside, paramedics worked quickly, their voices overlapping as machines beeped beside me. Liam climbed in, his face pale, eyes wide with terror, but burning with anger too. He leaned close, gripping my hand. She knew, Sophia. Karen knew. Mom had these same symptoms, and she called them drama. She covered it up. She let Mom suffer, and now she almost let it kill you. His words landed harder than the arrhythmia itself. My mother's death, my collapse at the table, Karen's sharp dismissal, they weren't separate moments. They were the same wound, repeating. The siren wailed as the ambulance barreled into the night, but all I could hear was Liam's voice echoing in my mind. Karen knew, and she had risked my life. The siren split the night open, wailing in uneven bursts that rattled through my bones. The ambulance jolted over every bump in the road, each vibration stabbing my chest like glass shards. The ceiling lights above me flickered past in rapid flashes, bright and sterile, turning the world into a blur of white streaks and shadows. Oxygen hissed through the mask pressed tight over my mouth and nose, but it felt like I was inhaling smoke instead of air. My heart was a runaway drum, pounding out of sync, each beat heavier and less certain than the last. "Stay with us, Sophia," the paramedic ordered, his voice firm but urgent. He adjusted the sticky pads on my chest, the cold adhesive pulling at my skin. Every beep from the monitor sent a ripple of dread through me, as if the machine was spelling out just how close I was to the edge. In the corner, Liam clung to the railing, his knuckles white, his whole body trembling from the motion of the speeding ambulance. His face was ghostly pale under the strobing red light flashing in from the rear window. "You're going to be okay," he kept saying, his voice breaking. "You're going to be okay, Soph. Please, just hold on." I wanted to answer him, to tell him I wasn't making this up, that I wasn't faking, that Karen had been wrong all along, but my voice was swallowed by the hiss of oxygen and the roaring inside my skull. The ambulance doors slammed open, and cold night air rushed in, slicing across my damp skin. They wheeled me out fast, the gurney rattling against the metal ramp before crashing onto the pavement. Hospital floodlights glared overhead, bleaching out the stars. The sterile smell of disinfectant reached me even before the sliding glass doors hissed open to swallow me whole. "Severe arrhythmia," one doctor shouted as they pushed me down the corridor. "Critical instability. Prep the cath lab immediately." Arrhythmia. The word echoed inside me like a curse, a name for the chaos I'd carried for years, dismissed as weakness, as drama. A storm raging in my chest that they had all sworn didn't exist, now threatening to kill me. Curtains snapped shut around my bed, closing me in. Beeping monitors surrounded me, their tones overlapping like an orchestra of doom. The sharp smell of alcohol wipes filled my nose. Cold hands connected wires, pressed electrodes, clipped IV lines into place. I tasted panic, metallic and bitter, as I lay pinned by machinery. Through the whirlwind, Liam's face stayed at the edge of my vision. He gripped the rail like it was the only thing tethering him to the ground. His eyes were wide, swimming with tears, locked on me as if looking away for a second might make me disappear. "I'm here, Soph," he whispered hoarsely. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you. I'm so sorry." I tried to shake my head, to tell him it wasn't his fault, but my body refused to obey. A doctor leaned over me, his eyes sharp with focus. "Her heart's critical. Prep the cath lab now." His voice cut like a scalpel. Another hand pushed something cold into my IV, and within seconds, the edges of the world started to soften, blur, warp. Then came the tube. Cold, foreign, sliding down my throat, stealing the last scraps of breath that belonged to me. I gagged, chest heaving, but strong hands pinned me steady. The monitors spiked into chaotic beeps. My body wasn't my own anymore. It was a broken machine they were trying to fix. They wheeled me into a long corridor, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing and flickering like failing stars. The gurney wheels clattered over the tile, each turn sending tremors up my body. Nurses called out instructions. Doctors barked orders in clipped tones, their words blurring together. And then, just as my consciousness started to slip, I felt a hand brush mine. A nurse bent low, her breath warm against my ear, her eyes darting nervously toward the hallway. Her whisper was nearly swallowed by the noise. "Your uncle's been lurking outside, Ted. He won't leave. It's like he's waiting for something." Her words shot ice through my veins. "Ted? Here? Why?" I wanted to scream, to demand an answer, but the tube in my throat silenced me. Inside my mind, the thought clawed and clawed. "Ted? What's he chasing while I'm fighting to breathe?" The nurse gave my hand a squeeze. Her eyes filled with something, warning, pity, maybe both, before she slipped back into the chaos. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, shadows pooling in the corners. Machines loomed, wires tangled around me like webs, and the cold only deepened the further they pushed me. Each irregular beep from the monitor was a reminder of how fragile my grip on life really was, and still my thoughts circled back to Ted, to the red blinking light of the hidden kitchen camera, to the cryptic email about Mom's illness and a will no one wanted me to know about, to Karen's sharp eyes, the look she gave me when she told me to suck it up. It all twisted together into one suffocating knot. Was Ted here for me? Watching me? Or was he waiting for something tied to Mom, something I didn't yet understand? The cath lab doors swung open, flooding me with sterile white light. The brightness was blinding, too pure, too sharp, and in that moment I knew the truth. While I was strapped down and fighting for my life, my family's secrets were circling just outside the door. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure which was more dangerous, the arrhythmia tearing at my heart, or the lies they'd buried with Mom. I woke to the steady hum of machines, the rhythmic beeping of monitors marking time like a second heartbeat. My throat was raw, every breath dragging against it, and the sterile chill of the ICU wrapped around me. Dim light filtered through the blinds, stripes of gray cutting across the floor. For a moment, I didn't know if I was alive or still trapped in that fading haze where my chest felt like it was caving in. Then I saw Liam slumped in a chair beside my bed, his head bowed, his hand still resting on the edge of the blanket, as if he had been holding me in place all night. His eyes shot open when he noticed me stirring. "Soph," he whispered, voice hoarse. Relief washed over his face, but guilt shadowed it almost instantly. Before I could speak, the door opened and Dr. Lee walked in, clipboard in hand, his expression grave but steady. He looked at me first, then at the family clustered behind him. Karen, arms folded tight across her chest, face perfectly composed, Dad, hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes darting anywhere but mine, and behind them both, Uncle Ted, looming in the doorway like a shadow. Dr. Lee cleared his throat. "Sophia, you came dangerously close. You experienced severe arrhythmia, a condition that should never have been ignored. These weren't panic attacks or dramatics or stress. Ignoring those symptoms nearly killed you. His eyes swept to the others, sharp and unflinching. From now on, if Sophia says something is wrong, you believe her. You trust her body, you trust her voice. Understood? The silence in the room was suffocating. Karen's lips tightened, her chin lifted in defiance. Dad just shifted his weight, muttering, "Of course." But I knew the look in his eyes. It wasn't belief, it was discomfort. My voice rasped from my raw throat, but I forced it out anyway. So it took almost dying for anyone to listen? For anyone to see me? I turned my gaze on Karen, her polished exterior cracking just slightly under my glare. You told me for years I was making it up, that I was weak, that I was drama. My chest burned, but I pushed on. If Liam hadn't called 911, I'd be dead, and you'd still be sitting here saying it was fake. Karen's eyes flashed, but before she could speak, Liam shifted in his chair. His face was pale, lips pressed tight as though he was holding back a storm. He looked at me, then at Karen, and finally at the floor. "I need to say something," he whispered. His voice cracked, then grew stronger. "When I was 16, I found Mom's medical records, her heart problems, the arrhythmia, all of it." He paused, his hands twisting together. I went to Karen. I didn't know what it meant, I thought she'd tell me what to do. My chest tightened in a different way now. "And?" I whispered. His eyes glistened. "She told me to keep quiet. She said if you knew, you'd end up like Mom, broken, weak, paranoid. She told me silence was protecting you." His voice broke then, the words spilling out like shards. "And I believed her. I kept it from you, for years. I thought I was helping, but I wasn't. I betrayed you." The words hit harder than the arrhythmia ever had. My safe person. The one who had slipped me Advil under the table, who had always been my small flame in the dark. Even Liam had been part of the silence. Inside, my thoughts spun. Even Liam betrayed me. My last safe person is gone. Tears burned hot in my eyes, but fury kept me steady. "You let me walk around with the same symptoms that killed Mom, and you said nothing?" My voice shook, hoarse but sharp. "You let Karen convince you that my life wasn't worth the truth?" Liam dropped his head into his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "God, I'm so sorry." And then Ted's deep voice cut through, low and deliberate. "It wasn't just Karen." Every eye turned toward him. He leaned against the doorway, his bulk filling the frame, his expression unreadable. "I pushed your father to remarry, to stabilize the family finances. To make sure certain assets didn't get lost." Dad's head snapped up, his face paling. "Ted," but Uncle Ted kept going, his gaze on me. "Your mother's death left more than grief. It left money, property, a will." His lips curved into something like a smirk. "I made sure your father married quickly, before too many questions could be asked. Karen was convenient. She was willing, and she understood the arrangement." The sterile air of the ICU felt suddenly poisonous, like the walls themselves were conspiring. My pulse thundered in my ears. "So you all decided my pain was negotiable? That Mom's death was just a stepping stone to your comfort?" No one answered. Karen's silence was louder than words. Dad's guilt sat heavy in his posture. Liam's sobs punctuated the air, and Ted's smirk lingered like a scar. I pressed my trembling hands into the blanket, my voice low but sharp. "You almost let me die to protect lies, to protect money, and I'm done being quiet." The monitor beside me beeped steadily, a cruel reminder of how close I had come to flatlining. And in that moment, I wasn't just recovering from arrhythmia. I was waking up to a truth more devastating than any diagnosis. The people who should have loved me most had betrayed me at every turn. The cardboard boxes felt heavier than they should have. Each one carried more than clothes or books. It carried years of suffocated silence, dismissal, and betrayal. I stacked them in the back of my car, the damp Portland air clinging to my skin, the basement door closing behind me for the last time. That basement had been a cage disguised as shelter, a place where I had returned in defeat. Leaving it now felt like I was clawing my way out of a grave I'd nearly been buried in. Mia's voice echoed in my head from the night before, calm but resolute. "Take my apartment. It's empty. You'll have space and light and a fresh start. Seattle is where you belong, Soph. By the time I pulled into the city, dusk had painted the skyline in shades of purple and gold. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender when I unlocked the door, a scent that clung to the soft curtains swaying in the evening breeze. Sunlight spilled across hardwood floors, a sharp contrast to the damp carpet and flickering bulb of my father's basement. I set the first box down and just stood there, listening to the silence. No Karen's voice, no Dad's sigh, just me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Work trickled back into my life slowly. Remote marketing gigs, small at first, campaign audits, social media strategy, a client here, a contract there. I sat at a desk by the window, the city buzzing far below me, tapping away at my laptop. It wasn't the career peak I once dreamed of, but it was mine, built by my hands, my mind, my effort. And every invoice I sent was proof that I could still stand, even after nearly losing everything. But Liam followed. Not in a sinister way, at least not anymore. He moved to a place only a few blocks away, knocking on my door with takeout containers and tired eyes. "I just want to help," he'd say, standing in the doorway like a boy asking forgiveness with food. "I need you to know I'm sorry." I'd let him in sometimes. We'd eat quietly, his words hovering in the air between bites. But no apology could erase the years he let Karen's lies root themselves inside me. The wound he left didn't heal just because he was sorry. And though part of me still loved my brother, another part couldn't stop whispering, "You knew. You stayed silent." Therapy became my anchor. A cozy office with warm light, the faint scent of coffee in the air, books stacked neatly on shelves, and a chair that seemed to swallow me whole. My therapist's voice was steady, calm, patient. "What would it feel like," she asked one day, "to believe your pain is real without needing anyone else to validate it?" I stared at the floor, the question pressing into me like a weight. My whole life had been spent begging for belief. What would it feel like not to need it? "I don't know," I admitted, "but I want to find out." Weeks blurred into months. My body healed, but my mind stayed tangled. Some mornings I woke certain that every twinge in my chest was death waiting to strike again. One night, as I carried groceries up the stairs, a sharp flutter shot through me, freezing me mid-step. The plastic bag slipped from my hand, cans rolling across the floor. My heart lurched, panic clawing up my throat. What if it strikes again? I can't slip back into doubt. The thought spun wildly, echoing louder than the thud of my groceries. I pressed my hand hard to my chest, breath shallow, waiting for collapse. But the rhythm steadied. The flutter passed. I stood frozen, trembling, realizing the fear itself had nearly undone me. Later that week, Mia stopped by, her presence filling the apartment like sunlight. She found me curled on the couch, fingers pressed to my sternum. Her eyes softened and she knelt beside me. "You don't have to tough it out anymore," she whispered. "You don't have to fight alone." Her words cracked something open in me. For so long, toughing it out had been the script I was handed, by Karen, by Dad, even by Liam when he believed silence was protection. But what if toughness wasn't survival? What if survival was finally letting myself be cared for? The true shift came unexpectedly. A friend, one of Mia's colleagues, came to me, her voice trembling, her hands twisting in her lap. She told me about headaches that never stopped, fatigue that weighed her down, a doctor who brushed her off with a smile. As she spoke, I saw myself at 15, at 20, at 28, every dismissal, every doubt, staring back at me in her eyes. "You're not making it up," I told her, my voice stronger than I expected. "Your body matters, your voice matters, don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The tears that welled in her eyes mirrored my own, and in that moment, something shifted inside me. By believing her, I was finally believing me. I was breaking the cycle that had chained me for decades. The Seattle skyline glittered outside my window that night, the city alive with lights and possibilities. I pressed my palm gently over my chest, feeling the steady beat beneath. Still fragile, still scarred, but alive. And for the first time, I believed that was enough. Seattle had always been a city of contrasts. Bright towers reflected on the water, neon lights flickering against the mist, but silence so deep it could hollow you out. I sat alone in my apartment, the night pressing against the window, my fingers tangled around the silver locket I had found tucked into one of Mom's old jewelry boxes. The chain was cool, twisted into knots, almost like it had been waiting for me to unravel it. When I clicked it open, her face stared back. That same soft smile, eyes warm and gentle, captured before sickness dimmed her. The moment I saw her, my chest tightened, sharp, stabbing. Panic gripped me as my breath caught. I pressed my hand against my sternum, heart hammering in uneven bursts. For a terrifying second, I was back on the kitchen floor on Thanksgiving, plates shattering, Karen's voice cutting me down, Dad sighing with annoyance. My pulse raced like it was trying to outrun the memory. I clutched the locket until my knuckles whitened. "Not again," I whispered into the empty room. The pain eased eventually, fading into a dull echo, but the fear remained, coiled tight. Mom's face glimmered faintly in the locket, her smile steady as if to anchor me. "You believed in me," I murmured, my voice trembling, "even when they didn't." Therapy became the space where I could finally release the weight. The office smelled faintly of coffee and lavender. A small lamp cast soft light across the room, the hum of the city muted by heavy curtains. I curled into the armchair each week, tea warming my hands, words spilling slower than my heartbeat. I spoke about Karen's cruelty, Dad's absence, Liam's betrayal, but always it returned to the same wound: doubt. Doubt had been sewn into me since childhood, threaded through every dismissal, every sneer. One afternoon, my therapist leaned forward, her eyes steady. "Sophia, you've carried their voices inside you for so long. What would it mean to carry your own instead?" I stared down at the rug, my thumb pressing against the locket in my pocket. "I don't know if I can. They've told me for years that I was wrong, weak, dramatic." Her tone softened, but her words cut sharp. "You already trusted yourself. You fought for help when no one believed you. That's self-trust." Her voice lingered in me long after I left. That night, the city buzzed beyond my window, cars streaking red and white down rain-slick streets. For the first time, I wondered if I could let my own voice be louder than theirs. It was Liam who brought the next piece of truth. One rainy evening, he arrived at my door, soaked, clutching a folder like it burned his hands. His eyes carried guilt so heavy it made him look older. "I need to tell you something," he said once inside, his voice low. I folded my arms, wary. "What now?" He set the folder on my table. "The camera in the kitchen, it was Karen's. She set it up to catch you being lazy. She wanted proof you were faking so she could cut you out of Mom's will." The words landed like a knife. The image of that blinking red light in the corner of the kitchen flashed in my memory. My stomach dropped. "She wanted me erased," I whispered, throat raw. "Even from Mom's legacy." Liam nodded, his voice cracking. "The will. It left a trust fund for you. Mom made sure of it. Karen knew. She wanted leverage to control it, to make sure it never reached you." I gripped the back of the chair, anger and grief colliding inside me. All those years of second-guessing myself, all those nights believing I was paranoid, it had been engineered. All those years she told me I was imagining things. All those years she convinced me I was worthless. Tears burned my eyes. And Mom, she was still protecting me. Liam lowered his gaze. "The trust is real. It's yours. Mom made sure you'd be okay, even if she couldn't be here." Later, I sat at my table, the folder spread open like a scar, the locket beside it glowing faintly in the lamplight. Papers outlined what Karen had tried to steal, but they also confirmed something stronger. Mom had believed me enough to secure my future. Outside, the city pulsed with life, but I sat still, suspended between betrayal and bittersweet relief. My phone buzzed. A text from Dad lit up the screen. "I heard about the will. I should have done better. I'm sorry." The words looked stiff, awkward, like he was reaching across a distance too wide to cross. Karen, of course, stayed silent. No apology, no explanation, just the same cold void she'd always given me. I pressed the locket against my chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath my palm. For so long, their silence had defined me. Now Mom's belief, and mine, would. At my next therapy session, I said the words out loud. "My pain is real. My voice matters." My voice wavered, but once spoken, the words settled deep inside, immovable. The shadows didn't vanish completely. They lurked in chest twinges that sparked panic, in dreams where I collapsed under doubting eyes. But each time I held the locket, pressed my hand to my heart, and whispered, "She believed in me. I believe in me." And with each whisper, the shadows thinned piece by piece. The coffee shop pulsed with its usual symphony, the hiss of steaming milk, the crack of beans in the grinder, voices threading through clinks of spoons on porcelain. The air smelled of roasted espresso and buttered croissants, sharp and comforting all at once. Outside, Seattle's streets shimmered with rain, headlights stretching into streaks of gold and red as cars slid past. I sat by the wide window, cradling a mug that radiated warmth into my palms, the silver locket in my pocket pressing against me like a heartbeat I could carry. The door swung open and I didn't need to look to know it was him. Dad. His figure was shrunken, his shoulders stooped, his steps uneven. This wasn't the man who used to stride through life with certainty. This was a man weighed down by grief and years of silence. He spotted me, froze, then forced himself forward, awkward as though the air between us might shatter. He lowered himself into the chair across from me, the scrape of the legs loud in the hum of the cafe. His hands fumbled with the edge of his cup. "Sophia," he said, his voice gravelly, unsure. I steadied myself. "Dad." Silence expanded, filled only by the soft rain against glass and the shriek of the milk steamer. His gaze stayed fixed on his cup. Then his chest rose, and words tumbled out, jagged. "I was wrong. After your mom died, I lost myself. I let Karen's voice replace mine. I let her convince me you were exaggerating, fragile, too much. But the truth is, I should have been there. I should have believed you." My throat tightened, not with fury but with the ache of finally hearing what I had begged for as a child. I pressed the mug between my palms, letting the heat anchor me. "You left me alone in that house, Dad. I was just a kid." His eyes lifted at last, wet and unguarded. "I know, and I can't undo that, but I don't want to lose you completely." It wasn't forgiveness, but maybe it was the first crack in a wall that had stood for decades. Karen's attempt at reconciliation had come earlier, a single text, clearly urged by her therapist. "I'm sorry if you felt dismissed." Words polished, hollow, sterile. Reading it had felt like stepping into an empty room expecting warmth. Dad's apology was crooked, imperfect, but at least it bled truth. Hers never would. Later that week, I found myself again in the same cafe, tucked into a corner with my locket and notebook. A woman sat 2 tables over, her book unopened, her eyes drifting toward me too often to be casual. When I mentioned something about hospitals to the barista, she leaned closer, hesitant. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to intrude, but did your family ever dismiss your health? Act like you were making it up?" Her hands wrapped tight around her mug, knuckles pale. The question in her eyes, part fear, part desperate recognition, stilled me. "Yes," I said softly. "For years. They called me dramatic, lazy, weak, but I wasn't. And neither are you." Her breath shook, shoulders lowering as if a weight slid off them. "I thought I was the only one." I shook my head firmly. "You're not. Trust your body, trust your voice, even if they don't." Her eyes glistened, tears hovering but unshed. She mouthed thank you, gripping her cup like it tethered her to safety. In that instant, I realized my story had stopped being only mine. It was a bridge, a way to reach others who had been silenced by the voices that should have loved them. That night, back in my apartment, I opened the folder again. Mom's trust fund was spelled out in ink, precise legal lines across cold paper. To anyone else, it was money. To me, it was her voice carried through time, proof she had seen me and wanted to protect me when she no longer could. I placed the locket beside it, her smile gazing up from the tiny oval frame. I traced the chain with my thumb, whispering, "I'm free now. Mom's love carried me through." My chest rose steady beneath my palm, not flawless, not without scars, but strong enough to carry her belief forward. That was her final gift. Not only security, but the lesson etched deeper than any scar. Trust your body. Trust your voice. Even when the people meant to protect you don't. Especially then. Breaking the cycle of dismissal begins with self-belief. The rain had stopped outside, and the city lights glowed across wet pavement. I breathed deeply, the smell of coffee still clinging to my sweater, the locket cool against my skin. For the first time, I felt not only survival but purpose. And now, as I sit here sharing this, I want to turn to you. Has your pain ever been brushed aside by the people you needed most? Did they call it drama, weakness, or an excuse? I know how sharp that silence feels, how it cuts deeper than the wound itself. But listen, you are not alone. Your pain is real. Your voice matters. So tell your story. Drop it in the comments below. Let someone else see themselves in your words. Like, subscribe, because this isn't just my story anymore. It's ours. And today, you deserve to believe in your voice.